Join me as we learn Chumash, as we begin the Chumash Vayikra, the third Chumash of the 5 books of Moses, the book of Leviticus. The book of Leviticus is known as Toras Kohanim, the laws which are pertaining to the priests, to the Kohanim, as this and many of this Torah reading and many others talk about the sacrifices, the laws of impurity, the laws of the holy days of Yom Kippur, as well as Chumash Vayikra is generally learned, the first verse of it, at least by young children, as it talks about sacrifices, the holiness, and Jewish children are as holy and as pure as sacrifices. So as we're going to learn the complex details of all the different sacrifices that are enumerated in the following Torah readings of the book of Leviticus. Chapter 1, verse 1. Vayikra el Moshe vayidaber Hashem elav. Now that the tabernacle is already standing, and the work of the holy temple has to now take place, God speaks with Moses and tells him about the laws pertaining to the sacrifices. So Vayikra el Moshe, God spoke to him, Vayidaber Hashem, and God spoke to him, Elav. Where did he speak to him from? Oyel Moyed, from the tent of meeting, Lamer, saying, to address the Jewish people and tell them the laws of the sacrifices. Rashi points to the fact that it says Vayikra el Moshe, that he called Moshe, and then he says Vayidaber Hashem, and then he spoke to him. If he called him, then he's going to speak to him. Why the double terminology? L'chol dibris, l'chol amires, l'chol tzivuyim. It is teaching us that for all the times when God speaks to Moses, that every time God says the words Daber el bnei Yisrael or Emoir aleim, Tzav, Kodma, Kriya, he first calls them and then he tells them what it is. Because this is a way of showing love and kindness and respect to Moshe. Loshin shel malachi asher is mishtamishim by. This is also a terminology that the angels use. Shenemer, as we find in Isaiah, uses a terminology v'kara zel zev yamar. They each called each other and said, and that's the way God shows His love and endearment to Moshe. However, to the prophets of the non-Jews, as we find by Bilam, God appears to them only in a temporary way. Shenemer, as it says in the book of Genesis, in the book of Numbers, Bilam, and God chanced upon Bilam. Interestingly enough, if you look at the first word of the Torah reading of Vayikra, you'll notice that there's a small aleph. The Baal HaTurim explains that why there's a small aleph is because Moshe, in his humility, when God told him and he was dictating the law by God, he felt that this wasn't behooving of his ability that God should call upon him. So therefore he made a small aleph, being that he has to write what God said. But the word, when you don't see the aleph, it says Vayikar, that God chanced upon him, just like God would chance upon anybody else, even Bilam, showing a sign of Moses' utmost humility. Rashi Vayikra Moshe Hakoil Heiluch Megia LaOznav, that the voice goes and reaches the ears of Moshe. V'chol Yisrael Leishamim, but all the other Jewish people did not hear God calling him. Yochel, I would think Aflav Sakis Haisakriya, I would think even when there's an interruption, also there God calls him, like we're going to find later on. There's numerous laws, and then there's interruptions in between. Does God call him by each individual time? Talmud Leimar, therefore the Torah says it twice. Vayikra, God called him. He called him once. Vayedaber, and then he told him all the laws that had to follow afterwards. Ledibur Haisa Kriya. For this statement there was, God called him. V'leilish Hafsakis, but not for all the other interruptions. They were all part of the same statement. If so, Mahayu Hafsakis Mishamshim, so why are there interruptions? Did God tell it them at once, or were there interruptions? God called him, told him the statements, then gave him the ability that he should have some breathing room in between so he can understand and absorb everything that God told him. And then God would continue to say, how much more so if Moshe needed time and breaks to absorb what was being told to him, how much more so simple people who are hearing something from an individual, from a human being, not Moses from God, how much more so we should also need breaks to be able to understand, appreciate, and realize and embrace and really understand what's being learned. A love to him, lemay tasarein, to exclude arein. Omer Yehuda ben Beseir said, Yud Gibel Nibers Neber Vater L'Moshe Aaron. There were 13 times in the Torah where God spoke to Moses and Aaron together. Then we also find 13 times where Aaron is the exception. L'lamedcha, to teach you, shelo Aaron nemru elo Moshe, to tell you that it was not said to Aaron and only to Moshe. Sheyemer laharin, that then afterwards Moshe would have to then teach it to Aaron. These are the 13 exceptions. Every time it says to speak to him, and I would speaking to him, meaning it's saying specifically to Moses and not to Aaron. And all of them are enumerated in the Torah Kahana, meaning in the book of Leviticus, and the different places that we find that are mentioned. Yochel, I would think, Yishmuel that he would hear that maybe just the actual statement he didn't hear, but the actual calling they did hear. Talmud Lemar therefore tells us that God called him, and only when he called him, and nobody else heard it. From the tent of meeting. It teaches us that the voice would stop at the entrance of the tent of meeting of the tabernacle, and nobody else would hear it. Yochel, I would think, the reason why people couldn't hear it, because it was a very soft voice. Therefore it says, Talmud Leimer es hakoil. Therefore it says the voice that they heard in the book of Numbers, that it says the voice penetrated, that Moshe was able to hear it even to the outside. Mao hakoil. Why does it say the koil with a hey at the front of it? Meaning, this is the voice, Hamafurish Petilim, which is explained in Psalm 29. The voice of God penetrates and it breaks the trees. It's a powerful voice. Why then does it say from the tent of meeting? It teaches us that the voice would then end there and nobody else would hear it. We find a similar thing in a different text. In Hezekiel, where he talks about the voice that would emanate from above the krubim were only heard until the outside courtyard. I would think because it's a soft voice. Therefore, it continues to say because God's voice is a penetrating voice, a strong voice. Why does it then say until the outside courtyard? Once it reached the outside courtyard, then it would stop. Yochel, I would think mikol habayis. I would think that the whole entire voice was heard about in all parts of the holy tabernacle. Talmud Leimar. Therefore, it says mi'alek hapoydas that it came from above the cover of the ark. Mi'alek hapoydas kula Talmud Leimar bein shnei hakovruvim. I would think that maybe it's coming from the entire ark's cover. Therefore, he tells me the voice emanated only specifically from between the two krubim. Leimar, to address saying. What does it mean saying? Go out and tell the Jewish people words of encouragement, words that bring them of inspiration, that will bring them to repentance, and showing them why is God speaking to me is only in the honor and the merit of the Jewish people. That we find that the 38 years after the sin of the spies, which is enumerated in the book of Numbers, then those 38 years that the Jewish people were considered distant from God, because of the case of the spies. The God did not speak individually with Moses. As it says, only once all the people died, only then did God speak to me. Then did God speak to me in a close way. Another reason why it says the word lemor here, to address, go out, speak to the Jewish people, tell them the words I say, and let me know what their response is. As it says later in the book of Exodus, that when Moshe was told a word by God on Mount Sinai, he went and told it to the Jewish people. And then Moshe came and told back the Jewish people what God said. Told God what the Jewish people said. Verse 2. David al b'nei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people. And you will tell them. Odom ki yakriv mikem, a man or a woman from you who will bring from among you a sacrifice. Mina behema, mina bakar u'mina tzoyin. You must bring the sacrifice from domestic animals, from cattle or from flock. Takrivu es karbanchem, you will bring your sacrifice. Rashi, Adam ki yakriv mikem, Bekarbanis nedava dibre. This is referring to certain type of sacrifices, which were a sacrifice that a person willingly will bring on his own. Adam, over here he doesn't say man or woman just as a human. V'lama nemar, why does he say the terminology Adam? Ma Adam rishon l'sakrif min hagezel. You have to learn from Adam. Just like Adam didn't bring a sacrifice from something that was stolen, everything belonged to him. So too, you should not bring from a stolen animal. Habehema, why didn't it say the animal, the domestic animals? Yochel, I would think, Shaf Chayi Beklal, that even a wild animal. Talmud Leimer, Bakavert saying, therefore it tells me the cattle and the sheep that it has to be something from which is a kosher for an animal to bring, which is a domestic animal. Mina Behema. Why from the animal? What does it mean from the animal? Not all of it. Meaning, that there were certain animals that you were not allowed to bring because if they were used for if it was used for a transgression, if it were used for an aveira, that it was used inappropriately, then it cannot be brought as a sacrifice because that is disgusting before God. Mina bakar, from the cattle. Why does he tell me again what kind? Min, again, min from lahaitzi, this comes to exclude, that's a nevad, one that was served for idolatry. Min hatzain, from the sheep, lahaitzi asamukta, one that was designated for idolatry, is also not allowed to be brought as a sacrifice. Min hatzain, from the sheep, lahaitzi afes negeach shehemis, this comes to exclude, besides all the previous ones that we mentioned previously, that if this was a goring animal, that it gored an animal and because of it it killed him, one is not allowed to bring it as a sacrifice. Rashi then continues to discuss about how do we know about what would be considered illegitimate or inappropriate to bring for a sacrifice. Then when the Torah says again, if from later on in verse 3, it's going to say from the cattle, she'ein Talmud leimar, this is, you didn't have to repeat it. Well, over there it's coming to exclude is an animal that was injured, so therefore it's not considered a kosher animal. It is prohibited from eating, so too, one is not allowed to bring it as a sacrifice as well. Interesting that the Chassidus explains that it says, technically, really it should say, Adam mikem ki yaakov, a person from amongst you that will bring. Why does it say, Adam ki yaakov mikem, a person from you that will bring? As the Alter Rebbe explains and then brought down in many places in Chassidus, that the word Adam, that a person has to bring a sacrifice, he himself comes close to God. But it has to be mikem, from within you, even bringing the animalistic inclination. The animal within you has to come close to God as well. Verse 3. Im oila karbanai, if the sacrifice is going to be an ascent offering, min habakar, from the cattle, zachar tamim yakrivenu, which will be an unblemished male, he should bring close al pesach hayel moyed to the tent, to the entrance of the tent of meeting. Yakrivenu, he should bring yakrivaisa, you should bring it lertzain lifnei Hashem, willingly before God. Rashi, takrivu, you shall bring melamed. Sheshnayim misnadvim, that two people can bring it as well. B'shoila b'shutfus can bring the ola offering in partnership. Korbanchem, your sacrifice. This is still on the previous verse. Malamid shiba nidvas sibur. This is coming to tell us that when a person donates a sacrifice, that it comes in a way just like a communal sacrifice. Oilus kates amizbeach mamin amizris, and what kind of ola, what kind of ascent offering can be brought that the entire community brings it? This is an ola that was brought when the mizbeach was empty from sacrifices, and the Kohanim did not have anything to bring. They would bring certain ascent offerings which were donations and were left over, and they were called the end of the mizbeach, meaning like a person has nothing left, and that's what he brings. Now we're in verse 3. Zachar, it has to be a male. V'loy nekeva, but not a female. When it says later on, male, when it comes to the sheep, not that the verse of the Torah didn't have to repeat it, a zachar, a male. Why does the Torah repeat it again? It's not other kinds which are not a male or a female, which one may say, oh, well, I can bring it anyway. Therefore, the Torah tells me it has to be clearly a male, defined as a male. Tamim, complete, without any blemish. To the entrance of the tent of gathering, which at that area, does the actual person who brings the sacrifice go into the courtyard and come to the front of the come to the front of the tent of the gathering, but it's telling us that he brings it actually to the Kohen. And the Kohen is the one who deals with it and brings it at that point. But he has to bring it to the furthest point. He can't go and tell the Kohen, here, take my animal and you deal with it. That's disrespectful to the work of the Kohen. Why does he say first Yakriv, and now he says Yakrivenu? Like he says in the beginning, a male shall be brought, and then he says oil made, it should be brought to the front. Meaning as follows. How is that possible? Let's say if the ascent offering, the Ola, the offering of Reuven, got mixed up with the Ola of Shimon, Yakriv kol echad l'shem yishahu. So then each one, Reuven and Shimon, brings the sacrifice for that person, meaning he's saying, I am going to bring this sacrifice for whoever it may be, whether it's Reuven's or Shimon's. Or another case, what happens if a scent offering got mixed up with a regular animal, of somebody else's animal? So that person doesn't have to make his animal holy. What he needs to do is, he can sell the weekday animal, that means the animal that has not been sanctified for the use of scent offerings, even though he doesn't know which one it went to. And then they can all be considered as sacrifices. And then each one brings it for whoever it may be needed for the owners that may brought it. That's why he uses the terminology yakriv and sometimes yakrivenu, because sometimes it is an individual that happens, and sometimes the exception is, as we're going to see, I would think, okay, so therefore, if I'm saying if it gets mixed up, and I can just say whoever it may be for, that's whose a sacrifice it may be. What happens if this animal now gets mixed up with animals which are not allowed to be brought for a sacrifice? Or if it gets mixed up with a shlamim, a different kind of sacrifice. Talmud Leimer Yakrivenu. Therefore, the Torah says, no, you can only bring it as a sacrifice only if you know that it's a kosher sacrifice, and only if it's from its particular kind. Then I can say I can rely and bring one for the other. But if you don't know what it was mixed up, then you have to wait, sell the animal, and then it's used for something else, and you cannot use that sacrifice. Yakriv Oisei, you will bring it. What does it mean, Oisei? Malamed, it teaches us, Shem Keifen, Oisei, that if a person does not want to bring the sacrifice, the rabbinical court can then force the individual, Val Korchai, even against his will. Talmud Leimer Lertzeine, therefore the Torah says, willingly, Ketzad. How is it possible that you can force a person, but at the same time it will be willingly? You force the person until he concludes and says, yes, I want to do it. The Rebbe explains, what does this mean? It sounds like an oxymoron. If I'm forcing him, then he doesn't do it willingly. How can I force a person that he decides to do it willingly? So the Rebbe explains, because every person really wants. And sometimes you have to ignite within the person that he should want, that it should be a revealed wanting, and that's why he needs a little bit of a forcing. In verse 4. Lifnei Hashem v'samach. If we look, the last two words of this Torah reading is Lifnei Hashem, before of this verse, is before God. Then verse 4, it says v'samach, and he will place. This comes to tell us because ein smicha bebama, the only that when there were these private altars, before there was built the holy temple, people had personal altars that they were allowed to bring sacrifices in their personal backyard. Over there, they did not put their hands on the animal. The only time the word smicha, you placed your hands on the animal, was when it was Lifnei Hashem, before God in the holy temple. Verse 4. He must lean his hand forcefully on the head of the Ola offering, and it will be accepted for him, to atone for him. Lahavi, this comes to include Eilas Chayvel L'Smicha Lahavi Eilas Atzayin. Why does he tell us twice about the Ola? Is because there are two kinds of Olas. This is an Ola which was obligated that you need to have, place your hands upon it, and also concerning the Ola for sheep that you had to do it as well, place your hands on it. Ha'ola, the Ola, why does it say the Ola? Prat la Ola Sa'if. There was, as we're soon going to see, that if a person brought a bird, and on the birds one did not place his hands. Vinir tzaloi, and this was then accepted by him, to atone, for whatever sin he is bringing this ascent offering for. Im Tamer, one might say, Al krisas amistas bezin emisa b'dei shamayim malkus, that if a person's bringing about for those sins that there are a punishment of course where he gets cut off, or there's the punishment of the penalty of the rabbinical court, or the penalty that God kills this person, or by lashes, harei anshanam, or all these people, their punishment already stated and clearly put in the Torah. So what kind of sacrifice would this be brought for? So what is this brought for? What kind of sacrifice and what kind of atonement is this sacrifice used for? This is if a person missed out on doing a positive commandment. And so too, or for a negative commandment, which is dependent on a positive commandment, which with that there is no punishment of lashes for. So this is talking about, for example, if a person misses putting on tefillin, misses saying the Shema, those are all positive commandments. There is no technically punishment for it. He can bring an olah offering for an atonement for that. Verse 5. He will slaughter the bull before God. And Aaron's sons then must receive the blood. What would they then do? They'll sprinkle the blood around the altar, on the outside of the altar. That is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Rashi, these four things that it says that the Kohen has to do is, number one, to slaughter it, to gather the blood, sprinkle the blood, and then accepting it in the vessel. All of these things, the Kohen has to do it. If you notice over here, there are many things that are mentioned in the verse, what has to be done. However, the first item that mentions that the Kohen has to do is accepting the blood. Because from accepting the blood, the Kohen has to do. But the actual slaughtering, a Israelite is allowed to do as well. Lifnei Hashem, this was done, where was the slaughtering had to be done? In the Azara, in the courtyard of the Holy Temple. Vayikrivu, this Kabbalah, this is accepting the blood, catching it in a vessel. This was the first activity that the Kohen would do. Number two was actually taking the blood, bringing it, that the children of Aaron had to do it, the Kohanim. I would think that even an invalid Kohen is allowed to. That means a chalal is a child of a Kohen who was born from a not allowed marriage of a Kohen. Let's say, for example, a Kohen marrying a divorcee, and that child is considered a chalal. Therefore, the Torah tells us it has to be a legitimate Kohen. Es adam v'zarku es adam. Why does it say the word blood twice? Lahavi, this comes to include if it was mixed in with the same blood, that means the blood of the owners of this animal, or if it was mixed in with the blood of another animal as well. I would think even though it was mixed with different blood, but even by blood of a non-kosher one, which one was not allowed to be brought as a sacrifice, but or with the sin offering which had to be sprinkled inside, and it was mixed together with the blood offering of a sin offering that was sprinkled on the outside. Because some are sprinkled on the top part of the altar and some on the bottom of the altar. Therefore, when we're talking about the mixed up bloods, the Torah tells us, only its blood can be sprinkled, but not the blood that's mixed, either with a unfit blood of an unfit animal, or blood which is sprinkled in different places. You cannot mix the bloods. V'zarku, and they would sprinkle it. How would they sprinkle the blood on the altar? You would stand below and throw it upward, minakeli with the vessel, to the wall of the altar, underneath the red line. There was a red thread that went around the whole thing that he knew exactly what was the top and the bottom. Keneged towards the corners. Nemar saviv. Well, kach nemar saviv. That's why he uses the terminology encircling. That the blood was put on both sides, because he put it on the circle. It went on both sides on the corner, and he put it on both sides of the corner, and then he did it on the other side on both sides of the corner. So therefore, he had all four corners had the blood on it. I would think that you may think that maybe you can just take it with a brush or a thread and bring the blood and make a circle around it. Therefore, he uses the terminology, you have to sprinkle it, you have to throw it. And you cannot encircle it by just throwing it. But then I may say, if it says you should throw it, you should do it with only one throw. It should be able to go in all four corners. Therefore, he uses the terminology encircling. How does he do it? He does two throws which those two throws make it happen on all four corners that we just explained. Asher Pesach made at the entrance of the Olmod, the only time that a person can actually bring a sacrifice was when the tent of gathering was up, not when it was dismantled, and only then would it be valid. Verse 6. V'hifshit esa oila, then he must then skin the ola's offering, of the ascent offering, and then cuts it up into pieces. Why does it have to tell me, and the ola? Aren't we talking about the ola? This is coming to tell me that any time a person brings in a donation sacrifice, all of them have to be skinned and cut to pieces. Meaning that those pieces, to the very well-known pieces that were explained and the rabbis explained in the tractate of Yuma, not that you should cut it up even into smaller pieces. Verse 7. And then the children of Aaron are going to arrange a fire on the altar. They'll arrange the wood on the fire. Even though there's already a fire coming from heaven, still in all mitzvah, it's a mitzvah that the individual should also bring a fire. As we know, the lesson that we learn from this, that even though God gives us special gifts of blessings and there's a fire that's coming from heaven, still in all, we have to add our contribution to it. And if we don't bring our contribution to it, then it's as the fire didn't happen and the sacrifice is invalid. The son of Aaron the Kohen, when he's a Kohen. This is telling us that how does he have to do it? He has to do it when he's wearing the holy garments, that a Kohen is not allowed to work in his ordinary garments. Verse 8. And then the children of Aaron will arrange the meat will arrange the pieces of meat, as aroish v'sapoder, the head and the animal's fat, ala itzim on the wood, asher al eish that's on the fire, asher al mizbeach that is on the altar. So once, as we mentioned, we cut them up in sections, then they're going to arrange these pieces and put them on the fire. Rashi, B'nei Aaron HaKohanim, Kashem B'kihunam, when they are wearing their garments, why does it have to say it again? Because you would think, okay, I know that he has to wear the Kohanic garments, but what if he goes and wears the priestly garments of the high priest? Also, it's not considered kosher. He has to wear those four garments that are designated for him. Why does he separate the pieces and then the head? Because the head is not skinned. Because it was already cut by the slaughtering, and therefore it's not part of the part that has to be cut. Therefore, it's enumerated on its own. What is the poder? The fats. Why does it say the fats on its own? That he brings the fats together with the head, and it covers the area where we're slaughtered. This is out of respect for God. Asher al mizbeach, that's on the altar. You have to make sure that all the pieces are arranged on the wood and should nothing be sticking out. Verse 9. Before the Kohen places all the animal sections on the altar, he has to first wash the innards and its legs in water. Then the Kohen will burn it all up on the altar. This is an ascent offering, a fire offering, which is pleasing to God. Verse 9, Rashi. Oila, the word oila means to go up, l'shem oila li'aktedenu, because he's bringing it for the purpose to completely go up to God. Isha, the word isha, what is it coming to? Because when he slaughters it, he should slaughter it for the sake and have in mind at the time of slaughtering that it should be burnt on the fire. Anytime you find the word isha, it means a sacrifice which is consumed by fire. Nichoyach, the word nichoyach, nachasruach lofanai, that when a person brings a sacrifice, this gives God great pleasure. What's the pleasure? Not that God enjoys the steak, but shamarti, that the very fact that I told you to do something, v'naser etzeni, and you follow my laws. Verse 10. If his offering is from the flock, minaksavim from the sheep, minaizim from the goats, La'ila for an ascent offering, Zachar Tami Bakrivenu, which will make sure it's an unblemished male that he brings. The iminatzain, this is continuing what he said before, because the vav, the, and continues Meisav Alin Yerishin. So Lama Hifsik, as we mentioned, so then why is he making an interruption? If you look, there's a samach that there means there's a break. This is This is for Moshe to digest what God told him, to understand, to contemplate, that it should be, to think about it, and then he can continue writing and learning what God told him. So you'll notice that whenever there's a samach or a pay in the Torah, these are breaks, so to speak, when God told it to Moshe, the laws. And this is three exceptions, because it says from the sheep, from the flock, and from the goats. These three exceptions are telling us prat l'zaken. This excludes an elderly sheep that once it's over 2 years old, it cannot be brought. L'choila, for a sick animal that's not well, you cannot bring it as a sacrifice. Ulamazuhum, or one that has a bad odor. So all these are unfit for a sacrifice. Verse 11. And this must be slaughtered next to the north side. On the north side of the altar Lefnei Hashem, in front of God. And then the children of Aaron will then dash the blood on the altar, encircling it. What does the word Yerech mean? Outside the Mizbeach, on the side of the altar. It's a final Lefnei Hashem, north side in front of God. However, when it comes to the personal altars that people had, they would not have the issues of which side they would burn, which side they would slaughter on. They can slaughter it on either side that they want. Verse 12. We will then cut it into pieces, its head and its fast. And then the Kohen would arrange it on the wood, asher al eish, that's on the fire, asher al mizbeach, that's on the altar. Verse 13, and the innards and the the legs, he will first wash with water. And then the Kohen will bring it all as a sacrifice. He will then burn it on the altar. This is an ascent offering. Ishe, consumed in fire. A pleasing offering to Hashem. This concludes the first Torah reading of Vayikra.